What if I told you that in the NBA, something as small as a loose jersey could literally swing the outcome of a game, or that there's an actual rule for what happens if an entire team just disappears overnight? Yeah, this league isn't just about highlight dunks and buzzer beaters. Hidden deep in the rulebook are some of the strangest, pettiest, and most unexpected rules you probably never heard of. And by the end of this, you're going to see the NBA in a completely different way. Let's start with something that sounds ridiculously minor but has already changed real games. Uniform violations, specifically untucked jerseys. It seems harmless, right? A player forgets to tuck in their jersey, no big deal. The first time it happens, it's just a warning. But if it happens again, that's a technical foul. And not just that, it also counts as a delay of game. Now, that might sound like something nobody would ever care about until it actually happens in a clutch moment. Late in a tight game with everything on the line, one small technical can flip everything. And that's exactly what went down in a game between the Thunder and the Timberwolves. Minnesota was seconds away from closing it out. Free throws up, crowd locked in, it looked like it was over. But then, right as a substitution happened, one player checked in with his jersey untucked. Normally, refs might let that slide in such a huge moment. Nobody wants to decide a game like that. But one player on the other team wasn't about to let it go. He pointed it out immediately, demanding the call. The refs hesitated, but the rule is the rule. Since Minnesota had already been warned earlier, the second violation triggered a technical. That gave the other team a free throw, shifted momentum, and completely changed how the final seconds played out. What should have been a simple closeout turned into overtime chaos. It's wild to think something so small can have that kind of impact, but that's the NBA. And while some rules feel petty, others are designed to shape how the game is played in a much bigger way. Take last-second heaves, for example. You know those half-court shots players take right before the buzzer? Or actually don't take? There's a reason for that. Players often avoid launching those shots because if they miss, it hurts their shooting percentages. And stats matter a lot. Contracts, reputation, legacy, it's all tied to numbers. The league noticed this trend and decided they didn't like it. Fans love buzzer beaters. Those wild, desperate shots are part of what makes basketball exciting. So the NBA came up with a solution. Starting in an upcoming season, if a player takes a shot from beyond a certain distance, 36 feet or more, within the final 3 seconds of the first 3 quarters, it won't count against their individual shooting stats if they miss. Instead, it goes down as a team attempt. Sounds perfect, right? No downside to trying. But here's the twist. If the shot goes in, it does count for the player. So basically, you get all the reward and none of the risk. It's like the league engineered a loophole to encourage more highlights. But if you think that rule is strange, it's nothing compared to what the NBA has planned for worst-case scenarios. And I mean worst case. Buried deep in the rulebook is something called the disaster draft. And yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. The NBA has a contingency plan in case an entire team is somehow wiped out, whether through tragedy, accident, or anything unthinkable. It's incredibly unlikely, but the league doesn't leave anything to chance. Here's how it works. If a team were suddenly gone, the rest of the league wouldn't just move on without them. Instead, every other franchise would be required to protect a limited number of players, usually around 5. After that, the affected team would be allowed to rebuild by selecting unprotected players from every other roster, one from each team until they have a full squad again. It's eerie to think about, but also kind of fascinating. The NBA literally has a plan to rebuild an entire franchise in a single day. And that's not even the only rare situation they've accounted for. There's another rule so unusual it's only been applied once in modern basketball.
Normally, players get 6 fouls. Once they hit that limit, they're out of the game. Simple as that. But what happens if a team runs out of players entirely? It sounds impossible, but injuries and fouls can stack up fast. And in one game, it actually happened. A team had so many players fouled out or unavailable that they physically didn't have anyone left to put on the court. The game couldn't just end like that, so the NBA enforced a special rule. The last player to foul out had to stay in the game. But there was a catch. Every additional foul that player committed after returning would count not just as a personal foul, but also as a technical foul for the team. So they could keep playing, but every mistake came with a heavier price. It turned the rest of the game into a tightrope walk. One wrong move and you're giving away points. Still, Not every weird rule comes from rare emergencies. Some come from, let's just say, unexpected habits. There was once a player who had a very specific pregame ritual. Before every game, he'd grab a handful of fast food straws and chew on them. Not gum, not tape, actual plastic straws. It became such a consistent part of his routine that he could even identify specific brands just by feel, blindfolded. It sounds bizarre, but it worked for him, until the NBA stepped in and banned it. The reasoning? Safety concerns. Apparently chewing on plastic during games wasn't something the league wanted to risk. And just like that, one of the strangest routines in basketball history was gone. Then there are rules that deal with power, specifically player power. In most cases, NBA players can be traded at any time. It's part of the business. But there's one clause that changes everything, the no-trade clause. If a player has one, they essentially control their own destiny. Teams can't trade them without their approval. It's rare and usually reserved for superstars. Historically, only the biggest names in the league had that level of control. But in recent years, a few unexpected players have managed to secure that same privilege. And when you see their names next to all-time legends, it definitely raises some eyebrows. It's like giving the same level of authority to completely different tiers of players. Speaking of dominance, there was a time when one player was so physically overwhelming that he literally broke the game and the equipment. In the early 90s, powerful dunks weren't just highlights, they were structural problems. Backboards shattered, rims bent, entire systems had to be redesigned because of one man's strength. Eventually, the NBA had enough. They introduced a rule stating that if a player shattered the backboard during a dunk, it would result in a technical foul, not for unsportsmanlike conduct, but simply for causing too much destruction. And sometimes rules are created not because of strength, but because of danger. There was an infamous moment during a playoff game where a defender stepped into a shooter's landing space. The shooter came down awkwardly, re-injured his ankle, and was forced out of the series. That one play led to a major rule change. Now, defenders must allow shooters a safe landing zone. If they don't, it can result in a flagrant foul or a technical. It's a rule that protects players, but also sparked debates about intent versus accident, since not every closeout is deliberate. Then there was a time when scoring across the league dropped significantly. The NBA wanted more offense, more excitement, so they made a bold move. They shortened the three-point line. Suddenly, shots were easier, percentages went up, and scoring spiked. But it didn't last. The change disrupted the flow of the game, spacing became awkward, and ironically, overall scoring didn't improve the way they hoped. Within a couple of years, the league reversed the decision and moved the line back. Fashion has also been a battleground in the NBA. Players have always used style to express themselves, but the league hasn't always been on board. At one point, a wave of players started wearing ninja-style headbands. It looked unique, stood out on the court, and quickly caught on. And then, just as quickly, it was banned. The official reason? Safety. But many saw it as unnecessary, especially since there were no real incidents tied to it. That wasn't the first time fashion got shut down either. Years earlier, players experimented with wearing headbands upside down. It became a trend until the league stepped in and banned that too, citing uniform consistency. And consistency has always been a big deal in the NBA. Back in the 80s, players were required to wear shoes that matched strict color guidelines. One rookie decided to ignore that anyway and wore a bold, non-compliant pair anyway. The league fined him every time he stepped on the court with them. But instead of backing down, he kept wearing them. The fines piled up, but so did the attention. What started as a violation turned into one of the most iconic moments in sneaker history. Some rules are about time itself. There was once a shot made with barely any time left on the clock, so little that it sparked controversy. After reviewing it, the league decided to create a rule. You need at least 0.3 seconds to catch and shoot. Anything less, and only a tip-in is allowed. Then there are rules inspired by specific players. One dominant forward had a unique strategy. He'd back down defenders slowly, methodically, draining the shot clock as he inched towards the basket. It worked so well, it slowed games to a crawl. The NBA responded by creating the 5-second back-to-the-basket rule.
Now players can't hold that position for too long, forcing quicker decisions and keeping the game moving. And finally, one of the most impactful rule changes came from a legal battle. There was a time when players had to wait years after high school before entering the NBA. For some, that was fine, but for others, especially those in difficult financial situations, it was a huge barrier. One player challenged that rule, taking the fight all the way to the highest level, and he won. That decision opened the door for future generations to enter the league earlier, changing the path for countless stars who followed. When you step back and look at it all, the NBA isn't just a game, it's a constantly evolving system. Every strange moment, every controversy, every unexpected situation has shaped the rules in ways most fans never even notice. And now that you've seen what's really going on behind the scenes, every game you watch might feel just a little bit different.